Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time today on this important discussion on what can we do to make New York State more affordable. For those of you who don't know, my name is Pam Helming. I represent the 54th Senate District, as long as being the chair of the Senate Republican Conference. My 54th Senate District includes Livingston County, Ontario County, Wayne County, and the Monroe County towns of Chi-Lai, Mendon, Rush, Riga, and Wheatland. And joining us today is the amazing town supervisor here in Chi-Lai, the Honorable Dave Dunning. Dave?
Senator, thank you, and thanks for boosting me up even a little more here. But thank you, and welcome to the town of Chi-Lai and to our amazing facility we have here. I hope you all get a chance to walk around and take a look and see what's here. Partially because some of the funding that goes into buildings like this comes from our Senate representatives and to help us build amazing facilities like this. So I want to thank you. And really thank you, Senator, for bringing this to Chi-Lai to talk about this very, very, very important issues that you're going to discuss here this morning. You know, one of the things I think some people have forgotten, while from an affordability standpoint, utilities seem, and for my constituents here in Chi-Lai seem to be, and your constituents, seem to be a lot on the utility side of things, which has been really huge. But I think what sometimes gets forgotten, we think about the homeowners are paying more and more in electric bills and gas bills these days. But they also pay a little bit more because we have to pay more to provide electricity and heat to buildings like this. When we build these facilities, they're not cheap. So, you know, there's a little bit of an additional hit there. So affordability for all of us is a huge issue. And taxes, I will say, we're trying to do our part here in the town of Chi-Lai. We've actually lowered taxes by about 50% over the past couple of years, which is excellent. So we've tried to do some things, but I applaud what you're trying to do here to make our communities more affordable, bring attention to affordability, lower taxes, and you know, quite frankly, not on that agenda necessarily are regulations. And I think Bob Duffy could probably concur with some of the issues that we have with businesses and things like that around regulations. And I hope at some point the Senate will take that up in consideration and talk about some of the regulations that keep businesses, one, out of our community and keep them from growing and being more prosperous. So thank you again. I would love to stay and join you for this conversation, but I do have another obligation. But I want to thank you again for coming to Chi-Lai, bringing this to Chi-Lai, and having this very important conversation. I hope you enjoy your time here and you get a lot of work done and help and get our communities more affordable. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor. And I'm glad at the end there that the Supervisor did throw in the burdensome regulations, and I'm surprised he didn't use the word unfunded mandates. We talk about that quite a bit here in Chi-Lai. Also here today is the leader of the Senate Republican Conference, Senator Rob Ort. Senator, did you want to make a few opening remarks?
Yeah, very few. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Helming, who does a great job representing her district and serving as a leader in our conference in Albany on a range of issues. And I'm not surprised that she has put this together here today. I think it's very important. We are trying to hold these roundtable discussions across the state. We've had them in New York City. There was one in Syracuse that was canceled, unfortunately, because of the weather recently. Syracuse, is always when it comes to the winter time, always can be a tough place as far as the snow goes. And so we had to cancel that one, but we've had these roundtables around different parts of the state. I know there's one coming up next week on Long Island, because this is, I think, the top of mind issue. When you talk to any businesses, you talk to regular residents here in New York State, it doesn't matter what part of the state, what is on the top of their mind is, how am I going to afford to either continue to run my business here, continue to live here, to continue, to pay for groceries. I mean, it can range from a long-term concern, if you're a business owner, to a week-to-week to month-to-month concern if you're a New Yorker who's living on the margins, because things are just getting more expensive. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do is hear from stakeholders like yourselves as to what affordability and what the challenges are to you, because it's, we say that term gets tossed around a lot, but it means different things to different people, right? So it could be my energy bills, and I know that's going to come up a lot, the cost of energy, and specifically the policies and the changes in policies or potential policies coming out of Albany and what that means for energy prices here in New York, whether it's high-end manufacturers, business users who have high energy bills, or whether it's homeowners, especially in upstate New York where we know it gets cold. Syracuse sort of ironically, again, we had to cancel that because of the weather. So what those policies mean for people's energy bills and how that affects their affordability. It might be the difference between somebody being on assistance, like HEAP, or not being on assistance if the bill goes up too high. Then you have issues, obviously, whether it's childcare costs, food prices, right? We're hammering our farmers with policies in some cases that I have concerns with out of Albany. They can't actually pass on those costs because it's a commodities market, right? So apples and corn and milk, it's set. Those prices are set for them. And so if the cost for the farmer in New York is twice as high as the farmer in California or Pennsylvania or Mexico, Danny Wegman ain't going to pay twice as much for a tomato because it's grown here. He's going to pay what the commodities rate is, and so either our farmers take a bath or they lose out. And that's what's happening in a lot of cases. Businesses, if their costs are up significantly, you know what that means? They don't hire as many people. That's what it means. Because they're in business to make money, to sell whatever they're selling. Whatever it is that they're making, that's why they're in business. They're not in the jobs program. They're there to make money selling things. They hire people to help them do that. But if the cost is prohibitive because their electric bills are going up, because their healthcare costs are going up, because they got to pay more wages because everyone's wages are going up, then you know what? They go, we were going to hire 10 more people, but we can't do that. And so that's 10 people that now can't get a job that probably need a job. So there's a trickle-down effect as it relates to there as well. Housing. I know we're going to talk about housing. Why is housing is expensive in New York compared to other states? To build new housing, to build commercially, it's more expensive in New York than a lot of neighboring states and a lot of other states in the country. We need to recognize that and do things in Albany to try and lower and make housing less expensive, to make it a little bit more competitive, and then you'll see more housing. But as long as housing is really expensive, you're not going to see as much housing being built, especially in this economy, where home builders, if they build a house, they got to know they're going to sell that house. They're not going to throw up 50 new houses and hope to sell them. They're going to build 25 or 15 and go, okay, I know I'll sell those. And by the way, they're selling those 15 for more money, obviously. And so they're making their margins on 15 houses rather than 50 or 60 or 70 or whatever it might be. So New York State is one of the most expensive states in the country. We know this. We are here to listen to you, to take back to Albany and formulate policies and legislation that hopefully will lower those costs or at least mitigate those increasing costs. Because until we do that, what we've been doing the last several years is only making New York State more expensive. It just is. Whatever the intentions are, it is making our state more expensive, and people are leaving as a result of it, whether it's businesses leaving, people leaving, businesses not hiring, whatever it might be, it is driving people out of the state, and that is the single biggest threat to the future viability of New York is the loss of human capital. Because every employer here needs people to be able to do what they want to do. And our young, talented workforce is leaving for other states, and our taxpayers, by the way, are leaving for other states. That's a bad combination for the future viability and health of New York State, especially in places like the Finger Lakes, Western New York, going forward. So that's why we're here today. We want to hear from you. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Helming, who does a great job for putting this together. It's an honor for me to be here. I'm here for the duration, as long as it ends before dinner. And I want to thank all the stakeholders who are here today for your testimony and for your willingness. I know you all have jobs and companies and things you could be at, but you're here today because this issue is so, so important. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Leader Ort. So we really do want to spend time listening to you. And what I thought is we would have each person spend about 5 minutes talking about what are your recommendations for bringing down cost in New York State. And I was thinking about it on my drive over here. I have 3 young grandkids, and right now they're obsessed with like every magazine or every catalog that comes to the house, circling, making their wish list. So today is kind of like your opportunity to make your wish list, present to us what your wish is, not for Santa Claus, but for the legislature to help drive down costs for New York State. What's standing in the way for you and your business? That's what we want to hear. And I just want to say, sometimes when we talk about affordability, I don't even like saying that term anymore. It just feels so overused, if you will. But when we talk about energy costs, when we talk about or energy capacity, utility costs, when we talk about the things the leader mentioned, housing and child care, insurance costs, these are quality of life matters. And we have to get a handle on it if we're going to make our state a place where people want to live, where they can afford to live. And that's what's important to me, is making sure that our children and our grandchildren can afford to live here, that there's job opportunities for them going forward, and they can afford it. So without further delay, Bob, would you like to kick us off? About 5 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A, if that's okay.
Actually, I'll try and speak quickly. I want to thank Senator Helming for organizing this today. I want to thank Leader Ort. Once a mayor, always a mayor. We have 2 former mayors here, so I mean, things were mentioned already. I'll be a parrot. I'm going to. Joe Leatherstitch, my team is here, who leads our advocacy efforts. First of all, I have energy affordability and reliability. That's a big issue, and I think one of the main issues is infrastructure and also some of the policies. And we applaud right now, at least what we appear to be the halting of electrification and the cap and invest, because we don't want to chase businesses out of the state. We can't make it more affordable or less affordable. And natural gas, with all due respect to the advocates, natural gas, I think, powers about 80-some% of our power right now, and it's not going to be replaced overnight. And the timelines right now for those policies have to be rethought. And I do believe if the policymakers would sit down like today and listen to people and get a better sense of all sides, it makes for a more thoughtful policy. We support the governor's approach right now, all of the above, again, with natural gas, renewables, and nuclear. And we have a lot of businesses right now that cannot access power, as well as housing developments. They can't get power. Or the costs are so high to make that connection, it makes it cost prohibitive. So that's, I think, one of the major issues. I would say with infrastructure, maybe from my experience in the past, it's never a hot topic until a bridge collapses, a pipe breaks, or electric goes out, power goes out. Then it becomes important, and it should be important all the time. And our infrastructure for power in upstate was once referred to by somebody as equal to a third world country. So that's probably number one. Regulatory relief, it was mentioned before. We were involved with called the Blueprint for Change, New York State Business Council, and the economic development EDOs around the state were involved. We hosted a meeting at our chamber, and probably 30, 40 people, I think a great compilation of regulatory issues that are challenging the state. I have to go back to my time at the state, because the last administration, under the former governor, did a similar study, and that study went nowhere. And we did hearings around the state. A lot of the same issues. Our hope is this administration, it's not created now with people in office, probably has been going on for decades, but a great chance to fix those things, because we are losing people that moved to other states. And be it regulatory issues, taxes, even some of the climate issues. We had a person from the Utica area, it was 2 years ago at a business council board meeting, say that the regulatory issues he's facing with his company are so strong, if he leaves the state, he's being courted to go to a southern state. It affects climate much more negatively as opposed to staying here and working with them. So I think the issues of the regulatory issues, examine those, what takes so long to get a business open. And I think we hear from our folks all the time, if a business comes into this area and they're told we can get you set up in the next 2 or 3 years, they're on to Ohio or Pennsylvania or Tennessee. So I think that speeding up that process is imperative. Housing was mentioned, and not just affordable housing, but affordable meaning for your middle class, upper middle class, or maybe lower to middle class, working class people. I have a daughter who's a realtor. I don't know how people afford it. My wife and I could not afford a house today because it's all cash. It's cash up front, often escalation clauses bring houses up. The market's crazy. It just is. So how young people can access housing and young families is important. People, I'm thinking police officers, nurses, construction workers, people that are working. I think they're being priced out of the market right now. And we have 2 housing projects. Senator, I know you're aware of at least one major one in Ontario County. The issue is power connectivity. It's stalled. 600 units is stalled right now because of that, and hopefully we can resolve that issue because there's a hospital nearby. It would be a perfect adjunct in that area of Ontario County, and right now we're hoping to get support to get the connectivity in, but the issue of power has been the biggest issue with that so far. Just very quickly, we just did a survey of our members. No, I guess surprises here. Top priorities for our members so far: healthcare costs, workforce development, economic development, state mandates, as well as public safety and taxes. I just would close by saying, whenever I hear tax to billionaires, I don't think any billionaires are in a room here, but they are mobile. They leave. They leave the state. They leave income taxes. They leave behind. They leave investments. I think our experience has been if you lower taxes on people and businesses, you create more investment. And it actually has the exact opposite effect that sometimes what the advocates are pushing for. And I do think lowering those taxes is the important thing, making it more affordable for businesses, having them invest back in their business if they can. But I would urge everybody, if you've not read the blueprint, it's online. We can provide copies for it. There's nothing new there, but I think it really provides a great roadmap going forward. So try to be as cogent as I could on that.
Thank you so much, Bob. Just a couple comments. I agree with what Bob said. If you have not had an opportunity to read the Blueprint for Change, you should. It's excellent. Not only is the data there, but the anecdotal pieces that you share about what businesses are going through and their comments on the overregulation, the unfunded mandates, et cetera. It's a great document. I refer to it often. I use it in a lot of my speeches, refer to that data. On the issue of infrastructure, energy infrastructure in particular, I still have a concern because now I feel this momentum, and I don't know if any of you are feeling this, but there's this like sigh of relief almost that, oh good, the state's pausing the all-electric building mandates, et cetera. But that's not helping us address our immediate needs with infrastructure. And I know we've worked with you, Bob, with so many state agencies and officials, but it seems to me like what we're doing, and I don't know if you could turn this around for a question, but what we're doing is we're going to try and solve these problems by pooling grant funding out of pockets that were intentionally earmarked or should be earmarked for other infrastructure needs, et cetera. Like, that's not the answer, the long-term answer, or even the short-term answer. Do you have any thoughts on like what we can do to address the infrastructure issues? And if we want to speed up the building of new homes, one of the issues or the challenges that we have is how long it takes to get responses back from our utility companies on what the cost is. Capacity available? What's the cost of that capacity? It's a real challenge. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I know with the capacity issue, as I understand it, if you have a housing development and you're the first one into a large area, you have to pay all the connection costs, which becomes cost prohibitive for developers. That's I think one of the issues with the project in Ontario County. You can't put up many millions of dollars for that, and then you're paying for everybody else down the road. It has to be. The best way is I think the state has to get behind it, have to find a way to boost that infrastructure. And I understand out there, most of the connectivity is above ground, so it's not even underground. And I'm not an engineer, but there has to be a better way of doing that and trying to make sure people have power. And I think everybody wants to turn on a switch and have lights go on, power go off. And one of the things we talk about the grid, and I was on a panel in New York City recently, even for the climate activists out there, first of all, we support gas, solar, wind, nuclear, but solar panels are made by a company in New York State, upstate New York. It requires gas. So I think that the whole purpose, I think the advocates sometimes, I think, are driving decisions that are just not thoughtful. So I do think modest investment, state can come in and invest in the infrastructure. It has been neglected for quite a while. I'm happy to see, I look around bridges being repaired around the state, which is a great thing to see. The same attention, I do believe, has to happen to the energy infrastructure. And they blame utility companies. I think sometimes it's not their fault because somebody's got to pay for it. Ratepayers don't want to pay for it. You can't afford one more dollar on your bill. So I do think the state has to step in at some point and find a way. And upstate is the one probably that has the most fragile infrastructure right now for power.
Yeah. Thank you. Travis, do you want to introduce yourself and then
Yeah, absolutely.
share your thoughts?
Absolutely. Oh, good afternoon. I'm Travis Waddy, AVP of Government Relations at Big I New York. Big I New York represents independent insurance agents and brokers. We have approximately 1,500 offices that we represent across New York State, and probably 13,000, 14,000 employees and presumably millions of policy holders. So our members, similar to you, senators, you and your teams are on the ground floor, kind of constituent facing. Our members are also on the ground floor, customer facing, working with families, businesses, not-for-profit organizations every single day, trying to make sure that they are adequately insured and they mitigate against risk. And I can tell you that based on those conversations that I hear from our members every day, the concerns around the costs of primarily property and casualty insurance in both the personal and commercial line space it's concerning. It's increasing just like everything else. And so I would, to take something that's somewhat complicated and boil it down, I see the market, I see kind of two buckets. In this one bucket, and I think we all agree, you have these global economic factors that are putting upward pressure on rates, just like everything else in your household or your business budget. So labor and materials, we drive safer vehicles today, which are more expensive to repair. We have rising home prices, the cost of a 2x4. There's not a lot of dispute around that, but that's what some of the folks at this table, at this panel today, will also address. So that's one bucket, and that's hard to get your hands around, right? In the other bucket, I would suggest that we have I'll just call it a legal system abuse and fraud issue in New York State. And so what are those things? You've heard the buzzwords social inflation, nuclear verdicts. We just kind of have this culture of have you been hurt in an accident? It's your payday. It's you've won the lottery. All states across the country are grappling with those economic factors, right? So what's different about New York? And I would contend that it is that kind of that legal system environment and the prevalence of fraud. So when we look at insurance, there's some personal responsibility, taking care of your roof, cutting down those trees, distracted driving, don't do it, put your phone down. So it's important that there be education around that, and my members do that, and I would argue that the carriers also undertake that responsibility to inform their customers on how to prevent claims. But what really separates us is when we hear words used describing New York as a lawsuit inferno, a judicial hellhole. Doing business here comes at greater risk for virtually all industry, but especially the insurance industry, because due to the risk of these nuclear verdicts, this prevalence of fraud. When we look at what some other states have done, and I'm just going to use Florida as an example. A couple years ago, and this is not an apples-to-apples comparison, but in 2023, Florida recognized that they had some legal system abuse challenges. They identified them. They came to some compromise solutions that included some additional consumer protections, but also addressed challenges in their legal system. 2 years later, Florida's seeing reduced litigation, 30% decrease in litigation, 40 insurers asking for rate decreases, if you can imagine that. Would love to be there. 17 new carriers coming into their marketplace. And even to the point where one carrier had such strong underwriting profits as a result of these reforms there's $1 billion refund going back to auto customers. 2 years ago, you didn't want to be mentioned in the same breath as Florida or California. They had the political courage and will to make these reforms to their legal system. And now we're actually looking to Florida and saying, what did they do? We want some of that. Georgia's also recently enacted some new reforms. And again, it's not an apples to apples comparison of what they did. We can do the same thing in New York because the different laws. But when I hear from my members, they say, Travis, why not us? Why not New York? And so that's the message that I'm trying to share is why not New York? As we have families and businesses struggling to make ends meet, insurance is so important. And when customers start reducing down to minimum limits or making changes that are putting them at risk, that's a challenge. That's more of a societal challenge that we're facing. And so I know we have some carrier representatives here today and looking forward to additional conversation around how we can help address this environment of this litigious environment that we have in New York State.
Thank you. Peter, do you have any questions?
Yeah, Travis, could you, I recently attended a breakfast, obviously, with you in Buffalo, so I sort of know at least the question that I'm answering. I always try to know the answer to the question I'm answering. But for the people in the room, and I think so you mentioned stuff there about Florida, and I think that's great, and I think it is important to look at other states. I know Senator Helming and I often do when we're trying to figure out, okay, someone else is doing it right, or someone else is doing it better. But can you maybe identify, so the changes in Florida, were those regulatory or were those legislative?
Legislative changes in Florida.
Can you speak to maybe one or two legislative changes here in New York? I realize it's not apples to apples, but can you speak to one or two legislative changes here in New York that you think would at least be in the same ballpark of achieving some of the same results that Florida has seen?
Of course, I think a big one that we're hearing more and more about is something called third-party litigation financing, where you have private equity hedge funds using our court systems as an investment, essentially. The state legislature did pass important consumer guardrails with respect to third-party litigation funding. So very important bill that did pass that has yet to be sent to the governor. Interest rate cap on consumers, opportunities for consumers who enter into these agreements to get out of the agreement if they over a certain number of days if they're concerned about it. What was unfortunately missing from the bill was disclosure of third-party litigation funding agreements in court proceedings when there's a claim. So when you have a case, insurers disclose all sorts of information, but what remains hidden is the existence of a third-party litigation funding agreement. So what does that mean? Why is that a concern? Does it mean that there is a third party that we don't know about that potentially has a figure in mind of what this case is worth and what they need to get the right return on their investment? And so there may be a very realistic and reasonable settlement on the table, but you have the shadowy third party saying, no, we need more. We know how much we need to get out of this. And so that creates, we would argue that creates some significant conflicts, and it's using our legal system as an investment tool, and that doesn't sit right. So we're just asking, with respect to that, sunlight, just a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of disinfectant on understanding what's happening in that space.
Travis, so I remember that it was like Leroy Comrie, Senator Comrie bill, I believe. And I know about this, as we talked about. I once upon a time was involved in trying to get this fixed myself many years ago. This has been going on for a long time. Was that piece, was it removed, or was it never in the bill?
I think the bill that passed, I believe it was never in
that piece of legislation.
Bill.
Okay.
So Senator Helming's familiar with the National Conference of Insurance Legislators.
No doubt.
Fantastic organization, has a model act on this issue that legislators, Democrats and Republicans from across the country came together and said, we agree, this should be the model for how we handle third-party litigation funding. The New York bill more or less tracks the entire model,
Except for
with
that
the
piece.
with the exclusion of that one piece. And so the bill has not been sent to the governor yet. We think there's a fantastic opportunity here to complete that bill and include that disclosure piece to help address what we're seeing when we talk about these large verdicts and just legal system abuse generally. This is a growing concern in a place where a lot of money is being made for investors, not necessarily for the people who are the victims or the plaintiffs. And so in many ways, I would argue they're being re-victimized by third-party litigation financing. The bill that passed, fantastic components to it. Let's just finish the job.
So you think that maybe a chapter amendment between the executive and the legislators, it's an opportunity for that?
I think there's an opportunity for that.
Okay.
Travis, real quick, and I'm not sure how relevant this is to property, but one of the things that always hits me when I'm in an insurance committee meeting is that a lot of the bills that come before us, they don't include a fiscal impact. We have no idea, and it doesn't seem to bother anyone that we don't know what the financial impact of whatever this new mandate is going to be. Does that, have you had any experience with that, or have you seen that in property and casualty insurance?
I don't know if this will answer your question, but it makes me think about, in terms of fiscal impact for legislative proposals, what we're really interested in is allowing the market to work, allowing and increasing, enhancing competition. So my members, our insurance agents, brokers, and the customers they serve, they need competition in the marketplace. We need more carriers. We need carriers to bring their best products, their best competitive rates. But much of the legislation that we see considered and proposed in New York, I think, has a chilling effect on that. So any industry, any business that wants to come do business in New York, there's too many torpedoes in the water, too many pieces of legislation that have a chilling effect and that I think stand in the way of innovation and new products coming here, and a desire to operate in the state of New York.
Thank
So
you.
I hope that.
Thank you. Ron?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, actually. First of all, if you mind, can I comment on that last question?
Absolutely.
So, as a former Assembly staffer, back when you used chisel and stone to write bills, I can tell you a bill never left committee without having a fiscal. Now, everything's either no fiscal impact or to be determined,
Yeah.
which, when we talk about reform,
Yeah.
I thought that was a very important point you just made, so I just can't help myself, sorry. So my name is Ron Epstein. I'm representing the New York Construction Materials Association. Our association basically is comprised of members who produce and recycle construction materials used in every facet of life, whether it be housing, whether it be commercial development, whether it be new data centers. I primarily focus on roads and bridges. And while my appearance here today, is on behalf of the association, my views are informed by more than 30 years of involvement in state government, particularly transportation. So I'm going to spend some time on transportation. I made some notes here. Despite the historic investment that New York has made over the last several decades in our infrastructure, one should be asking the question, why is it that we continue to rank among the worst states in the nation for our pavement and bridge conditions? And the answer is prioritization, but we can get to that later. But when we talk about affordability, I think it's really essential that the deterioration of our infrastructure has direct costs on working families, whether it's vehicle repairs, whether it's wasted fuel, whether it's lost time. You're a parent, you're late because of traffic or a road closure, and you have to pay a fine to the daycare center. Now, I'm not saying everybody has new cars, but you could have a 7-year-old car with a sensor on it. If you hit a pothole, you're not just dealing with the alignment, you're paying hundreds more dollars to adjust that that camera or whatever it is that's influencing what controls your vehicle. These are real costs on people. This is a hidden tax. At the end of the day, there's no other way to refer to it than a hidden tax, and people are paying up to $4,000 a year in New York State. Per motorist based on the condition of our pavements. In this region alone, and there's a national research foundation that does work on this, the Greater Finger Lakes region, the average motorist in this region pays $1,800 a year in increased transportation costs alone because of our infrastructure. I also think we need to talk about, some of the onerous requirements that significantly increase the cost for builders and the reconstruction of our infrastructure. It's no secret that we face some of the most, burdensome regulatory and statutory mandates in the country, right? It's either us or California, right? And these mandates, what do? They drive up costs, they slow project delivery, and they limit our ability to rebuild effectively. What they don't necessarily do is enhance safety, provide durability, or in general, take into account practicality. And I'll pick on a couple of things. And again, I was in a union. This is not an anti-union comment, but I look at prevailing wage. And, prevailing wage is an issue that tends to involve construction, whether it be public and private, primarily public. But what we say is, we're going to apply this additional level of wage to these projects. These are usually people who are making extraordinarily good wages. In certain parts of the state, someone operating a loader might be making $100 an hour plus benefits. And then we're going to come in and say, we're going to pay you even more. There's no benefit to safety. It doesn't get the project delivered quickly. It doesn't add any value. So we should be asking, why are we doing this? There are areas where I think it's necessary. I mean, some of our healthcare aides make minimum wage. And yet we're applying to people who make more than an extraordinarily livable wage. We're applying things like prevailing wage. I'd like to get into the scaffold law later in the discussion, but we talk about insurance and fraud. That is one that is ripe for discussion. Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder. We need to look at SEQRA and the permitting process in the state of New York. You mentioned the report that was done between Economic Development and the Business Council. There was somebody who gave an anecdote during that, and I apologize, I can't remember what company it was, but if they were identified. But they talked about how they could track the time that they ordered a pizza till the time it was delivered, where it was in every step of the process. I have members who have been waiting 7 years for a permit from a state agency. They don't know who has it, what desk it's on, if it will ever be addressed. And so
someone retires.
that's correct. I mean, these undermine affordability. These are issues that reduce competition, and they divert limited public dollars away from our roads, our bridges, and the other public assets that our public deserves and they rely on. And then, again, lastly, I just want to reiterate that these delays not only drive up costs on our roads, the purchasing power of our projects, they really, people lose confidence in the state's ability to deliver. And that is a real fear that I have as a public, as a former public employee, because the people who work every day in and out to deliver these projects, they could do tremendous things if the regulatory process would allow them to do it. But we continue to overlay, and I call it the pancake effect. Rather than rationalizing what we have, we add things on until it collapses under its own weight, but we never go back and correct those things that are in direct conflict with what we just added, so it creates paralysis. I guess in closing, I want to say that, we are committed, this is not a partisan issue from our perspective. We are committed in terms of building safe, sustainable, and vibrant communities. But we need help. We need a policy that strengthens but not weakens our ability and the state's ability to invest in infrastructure. And I thank you for holding this session, Senator and Senator Leader. I want to thank you not only for your being here today and putting up with what we have to say, but for your service to our country. I want to recognize that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
So I'm Jim Barbado, owner of Pridemark Homes, a second-generation home builder. We've built about 3,000 homes in the area through the years. I actually have 2 boys in college right now, and I'm not sure if they're looking to join my company, but there's a big part of me that wouldn't push them in that direction. I wouldn't want to start my career in this environment, which is really sad to say because I've had a wonderful career and wonderful experience. Talk about challenge. I'm also president of our Home Builder Association board. I have been for a few years now. But talk about challenges. I got out of undergrad in '95. The big hot topic was scaffold law. And we ran down to lobby day at Albany and talked to people, and I thought, wow, there's really going to be a change here. And 30 years later, we're having the same, we don't even talk about it anymore. I mean, the conversation's gone away. And we're the only state in the country that has that law. And it's really sad if you look at it. The code changes, if you keep reading the news, a lot of the states around the country, even California, has paused code changes that they're just hurting affordability. In New York, we have code changes coming up in 2026. I'm building an apartment project in Masson right now. It's 138 units. There's 10 buildings, and just the electrical code change on one building is $30,000 just for one trade. So start to multiply that out by the number of buildings and the number of trades. Electrical is one of the worst trades, but it's going to be significant just for the code changes. And that goes by quietly that nobody even notices. The new code includes sprinklers for units of 3 or more. In 2015, New York came out with this brochure, this pamphlet that we had to provide every customer when we built a new house. And I have them sign a form that says, you've been presented this material. If you would like a quote on a sprinkler system, we'll provide one. Not one customer requested a quote in 10 years. And the conversation always went to, gosh, what happens if I set it off by accident and I have water in my house and all the problems that come with it. But come next year, townhouses of 3 or more have sprinklers, and eventually it'll work its way to single-family homes. So the codes just keep driving up the lack of affordability. We talk about our lack of housing and why it's not affordable. I track on Zillow, they have this heat map index. And you look at Zillow, and Rochester has been #1 in the country for the year and a half I've been tracking it, for the strongest sellers market in the country. And Buffalo was behind us, but we're 30% higher on the index than Buffalo, who's #2. And it's not because we have some influx of population. We're just not building homes. And our solution, it looks like, will be to our lack of housing is people leaving the state because nothing's happening fast enough. So, I mean, it's sad to say, but as a builder, you just can't get through it. The approval process going through the towns, it seems that there's a support at the maybe county level or state level for more housing. But when you get into that town board in that town and 25 or 30 people show up in a boardroom, all of a sudden they change their tune, and the few people in the room change policy. And you get forwarded the emails of comments that come through going to these town leaders about how they don't want more housing because it's traffic and it's this and it's that. And you see them really just run for cover, and we don't get approvals. If we do get through the approval process, then it's a lack of infrastructure. Then you have to hope RG&E has the power to supply your new houses, or that the traffic is able to handle it. I have situations where, you have a road of Route 441 in town. At an intersection, if you add 28 cars, it goes from an E to an F, failing. So now it requires a traffic light. The development that tips the scale over to make it cause that typically pays for 100% of the improvements. And that's most of our infrastructure. So it's not the 20,000 cars a day that already go by that the state shares in. It's those few homeowners that you want to build for that have to shoulder that burden. So our affordability or lack thereof comes from all angles. It's very, very challenging. And then you get into the current housing market that most homes that are desirable are on delayed negotiations, which everybody knows that the realtor sets a date where they accept offers, and then there's a bidding war for that house. If you win that bidding war, you have to win it with an all-cash offer with no inspections. So this state does so much to protect the consumer, yet you let people go out and make the biggest investment of their life, spend more than they would anywhere else, with no protections, no inspection, and they found out that they bought a house that has mold in it. They bought a problem that they couldn't afford probably in the first place when they were buying that home, and now it's even worse for them. So we do so much to protect the consumer when they're buying every other product except for the biggest investment they ever make, which is their house. So I can keep going, but there's just there's challenges everywhere in the construction world, and obviously there's the quick changes would be that insurance scaffold law. If that can go away, that's a quick change that not just the builder, but then everybody that works for us pays a lot more in insurance than they have to. So I'll pass it along. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Kim.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Helming and Senator Orr for having. I'm Kim Gaylord. I'm president and CEO of the Builders Exchange of Rochester. We're the commercial construction association locally. Have over 600 corporate members servicing the 10 county region in Rochester. We've been around for 140 years, almost 140 years, 138. I'd say we're 138 years young. Oddly enough, we're having the same problems that we had 100 years ago if I go through the records of our board. It's kind of scary. I'm going to echo some of what Bob said. You know, it's power, it's infrastructure. I'm going to hit a couple big regulatory things that impact my members. The prefab bill that passed both, and I was late today because I was actually talking to Joe Morelli Jr. and we're trying to figure out if it's on the governor's desk to be passed. We hope it's not, because that's a huge impact to the members if it does get passed. For those who don't know it, the prefab bill is if a mechanical system is prefabbed here, but it's going to Long Island to be installed, they'll pay the prevailing wage on that job down there. So it's automatically increasing the cost of the project. It's a huge impact to the industry. MWBE regulations are a nightmare, horrible. Asking members, you know, I have a member who's a female truck driver, asking her if she's out driving the trucks. And my question's always been, are you out asking the male counterparts that? Because that's discrimination at its finest. I'm going to rock the boat, the marijuana law. People in the industry who joining the industry don't understand why they can't be high on a job site, that it's an OSHA violation, it's a safety violation. It goes back to what Ron said about safety. It's a huge impact. I know many members who've had to fire people, so then it brings you back to workforce development. It's almost like we're in this vicious cycle that regulations, all these regulatory things we've passed are just causing more and more problems across the state. And then, you know, if that's at the big picture level from the member perspective, and then just some of the other things, you know, we've got certified payroll coming up, which causes you to have to hire somebody new, which rises your payroll cost, your business costs. I could keep going, and I don't want to. But then you go down to the individual level again. You've got the home prices, the vehicle prices, childcare, insurance, everything. And I think one point that we haven't talked about, you know, Bob talked about his, you know, not wanting to buy a home today, but it's I think we're going to go back to multi-generational living sooner than we all realize. My stepdaughter lives with us. She's 30 years old, a single mom. She can't afford. She's making minimum wage, $20, $25 an hour. She can't afford an apartment. At the back end, I've got my 83-year-old mother about to move in with me too. And because it's everything. It's not just single family homes today. Everything is becoming unaffordable. So I'm going to pass it on to that.
Thank you, Kim. Would you like to go?
You guys hammered it all out. Oh, it's all good.
Something you said, Mike, I have to go use the restroom, okay?
That's no problem.
Kim,
thank you, Leader.
Just real quick, too, on your comment about not being able to afford new housing. My daughter's son-in-law moved back from North Carolina last year. My son-in-law finished up his military career, and they wanted to come back home. They actually had the money to buy a new home, but trying to find a home, it's next to impossible. And they put in so many cash offers, but the market is it's insane right now. And it gets back to, unless we build more homes and we have more competition, I don't.
I'm vice chair of Habitat's, Greater Rochester Habitat's board. So think about what Habitat's mission is, affordable housing. It's costing Habitat now over $400,000 to build a home.
Yeah.
And Jim knows, he sees it, and it's such a huge crisis today.
And Bob, you had mentioned earlier about how you don't know how people do it now, like you and your wife wouldn't be able to afford a home right now. My husband and I are in an old farmhouse. We should be downsizing right now, but there's no place we can go that's affordable or available. So I think we have a lot of problems in the whole industry that we need to address.
And to mention about lack of housing, I also own apartment communities. Our communities have waiting lists of over 100 people. for an apartment. So you can't buy a house, but it's also hard to find an apartment you can rent as well.
And I'll just throw this out there really quickly. I know I've been working with a couple of people to compile a list of vacant state-owned properties that could be converted into housing. I hear a lot of talk about we need to do this in Albany, but it's just so slow trying to get those properties transferred from OGS into whether it's a private purchaser or in the instance of group homes even, getting them out of the state and into the hands of like an ARC or someone else who's willing to operate them. So we have a lot of challenges, and I'm glad you're all here today to help find the answers. Mike, do you want?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Senator and Leader. When he gets back. Mike Durant, President and CEO of the Food Industry Alliance of New York, which represents the full spectrum of the retail food industry in the state. First, I offer praise for having this discussion. Affordability in Albany, or the Albany bubble, has been probably the most overused word over probably the last, well, we can all go back how many sessions were coming up for all of us. Some of us were joking about that earlier, that the number is getting up there. But in the last 5 years, really coming out of the pandemic, I think there's been a rightful focus from both sides. But having a discussion like this means there's a recognition that affordability for consumers, affordability for taxpayers, and affordability for businesses. You can't have affordability in the state unless you check all three of those boxes, because if you're trying to create affordability on one, it's like holding a balloon. The other side is going to blow or expand because you're trying to help one but not all three. So it's organic and it's systemic, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. The retail food industry over the last few years, and I think all of us with the industries that we represent would feel this way, but the retail food industry has basically felt that we've been under siege really since the pandemic. We did critical work. I think applaud the work that was done during the pandemic, but since then it has been really one thing after another that directly impacts them. And a lot of it stems from the CLCPA. We have pending litigation, a mandate on hydrofluorocarbons, and Senator, you've done great leadership on that. You're talking about retrofitting refrigerants before end of useful life that have a cost impact that could be $250,000, if not more, per rack. And if you think about an independent business or independent store, if you think about a chain, if you think about the average grocery store profits anywhere between 1% and 3%, if you impose $1 million+ on that store in a food insecure area that may not be profitable, you're creating issues of food insecurity. So that's one. 90+% of the food and pharmaceuticals that come into the state of New York come via truck. So when you mandate the use of electric, medium, and heavy duty trucks, after you've already spent billions of dollars to renovate the rest areas in New York, absent the infrastructure and the charging stations and a cold weather environment to meet that demand, now you have some more supply chain delays. You're going to have an increased cost because trucks are not going to be able to drive as long as they were prior to, because now you've imposed a mandate. And for our industry, with all these different things that are impacting the cost of groceries, that there's not a story at any given day, in state, local, national, about the rising cost of groceries, these all have an impact on that. Because of that finite profit margin, and you're imposing new costs, or you're putting lengthier delay in the supply chain. Some other things, reg reform, Bob, you hit it right. I was sat at plenty of tables 10, 12 years ago in a different job ago talking about reg reform and the need to do that. And I think that, we can get into a conversation about hitting a home run like scaffold law, which I've advocated for 15, 18 years now, or we can get into low-hanging fruit. But I think one of the biggest things that would send a positive message, which is not as profound as reforming scaffold law, is creating a hub that's a one-stop shop for either an emerging or existing business owner, where they can file their quarterly sales tax, they can track their licensing, they can track anything that goes through in real time, and a lot of this has been hit. There's no need at this stage for my members who deal with the SLA, and they rightfully recognize there are delays in licensing, but it's been a systemic problem for over a decade, that an existing business owner that's reapplying for their beer license should wait 6 months or potentially not be able to sell. or if they're a business owner that's going from a 3-store, now they're opening a 4th, that they should spend a year waiting to see if they can get a license to sell beer. There needs to be expedience there. We talked about the need for a fiscal note. I think everyone that deals with the legislature would agree that any bill should require that. I think the regulatory process, and I'm going to be careful because it's serving as a blessing currently with some things, but it's an open-ended process. The regulatory process itself in the state of New York should have an end and a closure. We shouldn't have a guillotine that hangs over our heads, potentially, or our members, when you testify and you go through the whole reg process and then you never hear anything about it again until there's a crisis or until something occurs that they need to respond. So there's another one. Our issue currently, right, and there was legislation introduced, is we're dealing with the penny shortage. With the lack of pennies, businesses don't know if they can round up or down. It sounds simple, but there's a lot of implications to that. There's SNAP pricing concerns. There's a whole host of things that we get into. So dealing with that. Looking forward, privacy issues, packaging like EPR, there's a whole host of things, ingredients. I think what's important and the takeaway, and what I hope that the Albany bubble, and I know that you both know this, and I know your conference knows this, but more in Albany need to know this, is through collaboration. If you hear from a constituent that there's a problem, reach out to those of us that represent industry, and as opposed to drafting a bill that you think is solving a problem, in reality, it's ending a solution that was probably already in the process of happening. Business adapts pretty rapidly. All of our members or the great business owners are in the customer service business. Without having a great reputation, without having that pride in servicing their communities, they're not going to be in business. They're not going to have a client base. So we try to stay ahead of emerging problems, and rather than drafting a bill and passing it quick and dealing with the aftermath later, that's what we're here for. And I think having more collaboration will lead to better public policy, which will lead to costs being reined in. So I appreciate the discussion. I know that you're taking things away from this, and I hope as we enter a very difficult 2026 where we're looking at rumblings of corporate tax increases, that's not going to solve anything. When we're looking at a mayor of New York City who wants a $30 minimum wage, which will impact my members, that's not going to solve any issue. This is a critical budget that we're going to be dealing with, and avoiding new regs, new costs, new taxes is going to be critical for my industry, and I think all of us sitting around the table. So thank you again for having me.
This is getting a little bit into the weeds, but on the issue of the regulations, I think you've all probably heard that we have more regulations in New York State than any other state in the nation except for California. Right now, I think I read, maybe it was in the blueprint, we have over 300,000 regulations on the books that businesses have to comply with. So your suggestion for the one-stop pub is well taken. I did want to comment on something else that hasn't come up yet, but it ties in with the regulations. And it feels to me like in Albany, these regulations are getting passed. You brought up the HFC regs, right? Drops on December 22nd, which I think was a Friday, after we had been pushing so hard to say to the state of New York, like, these regulations are going to kill our independent grocers. They're going to create havoc for our school districts and for some of our hospitals too. But the state came back with, look at these companies that support it. Well, these were national chains that they used, national chains. Like, we're trying to drive our small businesses, our locally owned and operated businesses out of the state, it feels like sometimes. But my point is, whether it's with the HFC regulations or it's with the clean trucks or the all-electric vehicles, is that the state has said, okay, we hear you. What we're going to offer you is flexible enforcement. And that's something I wonder, like, how does a business develop your model with, okay, there's this regulation on the books, you must comply, but at this point, we're just going to look at it and utilize flexible enforcement. I don't even know what the hell that means sometimes. Does that mean if someone in one of these agencies doesn't like you, the DEC, they're going to come out and nail your client? I mean, it's crazy, right? And I'm afraid, I certainly hope that's not where we're headed with some of the CLCPA mandates in the all-electric towards, yeah, we're going to pause it and we're going to do flexible enforcement in the meantime.
But,
Yes.
no. I think that's my point that I said when reaching out to business, because for a lot of us, there are businesses, I'll use food waste. New York passed a food waste law a few years ago. And, we're working through it. But there were members of mine that were already investing in the state of New York to create their own anaerobic digesters, to take food waste, to take care of it, and create their own circular economy, circular waste management infrastructure within their company. And with a lot of the CLCPA, it's not that what you want to do. There's members of mine that are putting solar, that are looking at regenerating, their own energy. They know they're a high energy business, but the timeline, it's that they want to do it, and they wanted to do it 5 years ago. They're not in the technology, the supply chain, the infrastructure does not exist for the mandates. And to your point about how do you live in a questionable enforcement, that's not a sustainable business model.
I just have to, one more quick thing is, so we're talking about how we need more energy, right? We need more capacity. And then we have bills like the food waste laws, et cetera. So I actually have farmers who have digesters. They do an amazing program. They work with great partners like Wegmans, Whole Foods, and others, and they take their food wastes and they combine them with their manure, and that goes through the digester, and they create this great energy product that should be going back to the grid. They can only send back a certain portion because of our infrastructure shortages. Like, all of this energy that's being produced is really being flared off or lost because the infrastructure is so behind the times. That's another issue that we need to solve.
100%.
So it's not only that we need more energy to go out, but we need to be able to put more in.
Well, and I think it's investigating what's happening, or what's happening that policymakers wouldn't know, just by asking folks like us what our members, or what businesses are already doing.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're hearing, for those who are out in the audience, and for very often, I'll say policymakers in Albany, on these big recent changes, and maybe over the years, they're very selective about who they talk to when drafting legislation. So, for instance, a lot of energy stuff recently is not being drafted by people, meaning they're not talking to people in the energy space, whether it's energy production, energy workers, they're talking to environmentalists. Now, that's fine. Those folks can be at the table, but how could you change healthcare policy by only talking to consumer advocates? It would be a mistake. It's a mistake because the people who need to provide healthcare should probably be at the table if you're going to do something with healthcare. You can have consumer advocates, you can have patient advocates there, but you can't have no doctors, no nurses, no hospital administrators. That's how you get bad policy, or I would say dumb policy. Bail reform. I know we're not, but how can you have criminal justice reform without the people who enforce criminal justice laws? Cops, DAs, we don't want you at the table. We only want criminal justice advocates, people who've been in jail. That's how you get dumb policy. I know some people, don't say dumb. It's dumb. It's a dumb way to do it. It's a bad way to do it. And it's intentional. I don't want to talk to you because I know you're going to bring up something that's going to be inconvenient to what I'm trying to do here. I don't want a fiscal note because that's going to get in the way of doing this because we're going to find out it costs a lot of money. And we don't want to let the cost of this get in the way. It reminds me of Mark Twain, right? Never let the facts get in the way of a good story. I don't want to let your story get in the way of what I'm trying to do here. You're kind of mucking things up. And so it's very frustrating. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. But the reason you're here today is because you're not at the table when we're doing these things. None of you, I'd be willing to bet, are at the table. You, once upon a time, were, because you were the second highest elected official in the state. That's the only way he got there to the table. Today, he represents a lot of people who are not. And I thank him for that. But the last thing, this is a shameless plug, but I'm up here. Senate Bill 2371, sponsored by Senator Ort. But it's a bill that has existed for a long time that any new regulation, it would force the state to amend or repeal any offsetting regulation that already exists. This is what somebody was saying, like the pancake. We pass regulations all the time that in some cases already exist federally. So the state is just adding our own because we want to be at the party too. And very often, or we pass multiple regulations over the course of a long time that have just a cumbersome effect, maybe not to us as legislators, but certainly to people on the ground who have to navigate these things. Because now you have multiple regulations from multiple levels of government, and guess what? They each come with a form and a fee and a cost. And I'm sorry, it adds, we're talking about affordability, sometimes you know who pays that cost? Not even the business, the consumer. That gets passed along. It gets passed along because the business isn't just going to eat it out of the goodness of their heart because they're not in the charity business. They're in the making money business. That's what capitalism is, even though some people don't agree with that anymore. And so we have to understand, I think for a lot of, I want to just, I'll close with this, a lot of people, I think, they only think about, when we talk about cost, they think about, okay, I go get the cup of coffee, crap, coffee's gotten really up. And so who you're mad at? You're mad at Tim Hortons because they're the guy that's I'm paying the money to. We never stop to think, and we have to, why is this going up? Why is this more expensive where I live than somewhere else? Why? Especially in a day and age when people are more mobile. That's something we haven't talked about today. People are more mobile than ever in 2025, and they're only going to get more mobile as we go forward. They don't have to live here. They don't have to live in Manhattan or Rochester or Buffalo. They can live anywhere and work anywhere thanks to our phones and thanks to technology. And so guess what? New York better get competitive with other states and what other places are doing, or we're going to continue to shed employees, jobs, kids, and grandkids. And for the rest of us who are staying here, guess what? Things are going to get more expensive because you have less people paying the bill. And so we have to support, not my law is out there, but some kind of law that says we have to really, before we pass more and more regulations, we got to stop and, is there already one on the books? Or if there is an old one that's outdated, let's get rid of that, and then we pass the new one. And so that bill is one attempt to try to address that. But like everyone's brought up regulations here because that's one of those things that legislators, by the way, it's very, and I'm not blaming anyone here or anyone, but it's very convenient because I'll say, well, I didn't pass that DEC regulation, and it's true, I didn't. But I think we have a responsibility to rein in these agencies and these bureaucrats who are elected by no one, and they're responsible to no one. But I am, and she is, and the Democratic senators are. We have a responsibility to say, you know what, I'm going to do my job, I'm responsible to you, and I'm not going to just pass it off and go, well, that's the DEC, or that's some shadowy guy at the Department of Transportation, sorry, not my fault. It's our responsibility to rein those folks in with legislation if we have to say you just can't keep passing regulations onto people without going through the legislature or without our involvement.
Bob, if it's okay, I have two quick things I just wanted to add. The first starts with bills that boggle the mind, right? I have to get it out. This one
Boggles. I like that word.
I didn't want to say dumb. So, people like you, Bob, you work so hard to attract new job opportunities to upstate New York, right? We have Fairlife that we're all so excited about. We have Chobani. We have the Upstate Cooperative. We have so many great things around the dairy industry. And then what hits the legislature? A bill by a downstate legislature to ban the number of cows that dairy farms may have. Listen, every report, every study shows in order to meet the demands of Chobani, Fairlife, and the others, we need more cows. But we have someone, an elected official in Albany saying, oh no, we're going to limit the number of cows. So I just want to share that as, like I said, another bill that boggles the mind. As far as eliminating regulations, one thing that the state budget director has asked for from the different commissioners is when he asked them for their budgets, he also asked that they provide a list of unnecessary regulations or regulations that could be eliminative, maybe they're duplicative or whatever. My advice to all of you is that if you have particular regulations in mind, that you feed it directly to him as well. And with that, Mr. Bob Farley.
Thank you, Senators. Before I begin, I'm going to defer over to our president, and then I'll follow up on her.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you, Senator Helming and Leader Ort. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everybody today about very important topics that affect all New Yorkers. The New York Insurance Association is the statewide property and casualty insurance association that has represented property and casualty insurance companies. So Travis represents the agents and the brokers. We represent the companies providing the coverage. And we've been around for more than 140 years, which really tracks the very long history of insurance in the state. Our members include stock, mutual, and cooperative insurers writing in every county of the state, from Main Street to Wall Street. Our shared mission is to promote a healthy and sustainable insurance marketplace for all of New York. Affordability and availability are linked. The only way to make insurance more affordable is to work to make it more available. Insurers want to serve New York policyholders. This is why we exist. They are our customers. And we share concerns about the rising costs. To make insurance more available, companies must be able to accurately assess and manage risk so they can confidently write business in the state. So what's driving the rising insurance premiums? It's the increasing severity and frequency of extreme weather. It's the aging housing stock and the public infrastructure that accelerates losses. The escalating material and labor costs for repairs and rebuilding. Also, auto repairs and towing. Those types of costs are significant. There's pervasive fraud in every really part of the insurance system in New York State, and it increases those costs for consumers. A difficult litigation environment that only grows more challenging by the day. Combined, these pressures end up in long-term market stability and availability challenges. Other states offer a cautionary tale. Delayed action has led to market withdrawals, challenges with coverage, and affordability crises. New York can avoid similar outcomes by addressing root causes rather than symptoms. There is no quick fix or easy answer. Policies cannot unintentionally restrict capacity, reduce competition, and raise costs for consumers. What do those policies look like from our viewpoint? We view that resiliency and infrastructure. We need to encourage more resilient construction and retrofits. We need to invest in stronger public infrastructure to reduce losses. We have to engage in loss mitigation and technology, support early detection and risk reduction tools that prevent claims before they even occur. We need regulatory modernization. We need to increase regulatory capacity and flexibility so insurers can respond to evolving market conditions and policyholder needs. We need greater fraud prevention. We need to expand the tools and coordination for insurers and law enforcement to combat fraud, which directly raises premiums. We really also need to focus on allowing companies to truly fight fraud. We do not have the tools we need with the current legislation and regulations. And we need to strengthen consumer protections from scams, such as unscrupulous fly-by-night operations that are taking away from the good work of reputable contractors and loss mitigation companies. And Travis went into this already, and I've heard it mentioned by several here. Litigation reform, we're at the front lines of this. We need to address the expansive and abusive litigation trends that have accelerated in recent years, driving up claim costs statewide. The biggest piece of this is, yes, we need change, but we also need to make sure that we are not headed even further in the wrong direction. And every year, bills pass that is only going to make the litigation environment here worse, and we are already one of the very most litigious states in the nation. We can address the third-party litigation funding. Travis outlined that very nicely. Certainly the scaffold law is a continued concern, but there is a lot that needs to be done with our litigation environment to make sure that it is truly serving New Yorkers and all those who are ultimately paying for it. So from my viewpoint in the New York Insurance Association, these are my guiding principles for policymakers. Prioritize market stability because stability protects consumers. Advance measures that expand availability, which is the foundation of affordability. Avoid policies that unintentionally constrain capacity, increase volatility, or force carriers out of the state. And encourage partnership, whether it's grocery stores, insurance companies or builders, I think we're all saying the same thing. Industry regulators and lawmakers must collaborate to identify practical data-driven solutions. There are a number of studies that have already been referenced today. There are several more that are out there. I think we need to look at what those studies are showing so that New York can be a better place for all of our residents. NIA and our member companies really do appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Our shared goal, in my view, is clear. We need to ensure New Yorkers have access to reliable, affordable insurance today and in the future. And without thoughtful action, New York will not be able to strengthen its marketplace, protect policyholders, and prevent an availability crisis.
Thank you, Cassandra.
Thank you. Senator Ort and Senator Helming, I want to thank you very much for being here and for holding this hearing. As you both know, I was a longtime 30-year senior counsel in the New York State Senate, and I can truly say that our two senators here are some of the finest, most talented senators I've ever worked with and that have ever served in New York State. I also want to acknowledge former Lieutenant Governor Robert Duffy. You've served with great distinction and were exceptional in your job, and you've gone on to public service even beyond that, and we're delighted to have you here today as well. My present role is I'm General Counsel of the New York Insurance Association. As Cassandra mentioned, we have been around for 140 years, only 2 years longer than Kim's organization. And it is an organization that represents every property and casualty insurance entity in the state. And that's quite a wide range of organizations. Obviously, over the past recent years, the cost of insurance, particularly homeowners and automobile insurance, which is what we really represent, has increased. But it is reflective of other costs. And the fact that you are looking at the overall universe of these costs today is so important, because insurance, particularly in the property and casualty industry, has to pay out based on what those other costs are. And Travis and Cassandra have mentioned that. You know, when the cost of building materials goes up, when the cost of your car goes up, when you have a calamity for that, that cost is going to go up to cover that claim. And we have the wide gambit, as Cassandra has mentioned, of all different kinds of property and casualty insurance companies. Not every one makes a profit. Indeed, a large proportion of our companies, not only the cooperatives, but also the mutuals, don't make any profit. They are structured and owned by their policyholders. So this is not a situation where insurance is solely a big, huge business, which is a profit engineering organization. This is the wide gambit to be able to do that, to provide people with coverage at a time when their life has seen a disaster. So whether your home has a tree hit it, it's been damaged by a storm, a drunk driver hits your car, any of these types of calamities that befall you, insurance is there to try and make you as whole as possible. And there's a cost to that. We want that cost to be as affordable as possible. We're in the business to provide insurance to our people, to our policyholders. We exist for our policyholders. And as a result of that, we want them to pay as little as possible. We want to sell more and more insurance, not have it cost more and more. What are those cost drivers? As we indicated before, the cost of inflation is the largest cost driver for any insurance policy, because we're paying more for what we have to cover. We have to provide, and we want to provide for those claims. That's why we exist. But when the cost to cover those claims goes up, so does our underwriting costs. And we have to remain solvent. We have to remain true to our policyholders that when you submit a claim, we're going to be able to pay that. But there's also other costs that are more avoidable than inflation, because obviously we can't control that. But what we can control in New York State is those ancillary costs. Travis was kind enough to show some of the indications of other states, namely Florida, which has become kind of a poster child for what you can do with respect to tort reform. Tort reform is a big deal because those costs are escalating in New York well beyond any other costs that we're seeing. It's not just fraud, it is the cost of the verdicts that are going up. Travis mentioned nuclear verdicts, and now today we have what some people are calling thermonuclear verdicts. Those are 10 times that, which are tens of millions and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, where it can't really be justified. There has been in the past a provision within the judicial system called remittitor, where those kind of wild verdicts that are issued out of sympathy have been reduced by the courts. They're not doing that anymore. They're just letting it go. And that's a real problem because those costs have escalated beyond any relationship to what the actual costs are. But beyond that, look at what Florida did. I think the best example is the fact that insurance companies are providing over $1 billion worth of rebates since they passed their tort reform. One of the biggest measures that Florida passed was to outlaw what we call assignment of benefit programs. What happens frequently, particularly when you have massive storms or massive losses, whether it be from wildfire or some kind of natural disaster, is you have what we used to call in New York storm chasers or some type of organizations, frequently, by the way, funded by the plaintiff's bar, that will go up to people who have sustained losses and say, please sign this form. It's called an assignment of benefits form. You sign this form and we will do all the work that you need to make your disaster whole, and we're going to bill the insurance company for you. The problem with that is frequently a lot of these organizations who provide you with that form don't do the work, don't do it cost effectively, and the insurance company has no legal requirement to pay them for what they did. As a result of that, Florida saw this experience because they've had a lot more hurricanes and mass storms than we have, and said, we need to outlaw this assignment of benefit practice. If you want to have an independent adjuster, you can hire a homeowner. That's all good with us. But you shouldn't have these organizations coming to your house, ringing your doorbell after your tree fell through your house, saying, just sign this form, don't worry about the cost. Florida saw a dramatic reduction in insurance costs when they outlawed that assignment of benefit form. We will be having a bill this year that NIA will advance to try and do the same thing that Florida did with that. They saw a dramatic decrease in these unscrupulous people coming to the homes to do that. That's just one of them. One of the other issues that they did was they put caps on damages. They turned around and they put caps on attorney's fees. Attorney's fees are an enormous portion of that. When you have these nuclear verdicts, and I started my career as a trial lawyer, so I'll put that right on to start. At the end of the day, I want to see trial lawyers do well, but they should not do it against what are the benefits not only of society, but of their clients as well. When you have a multi-$100 million verdict, should that trial lawyer be getting 33% of that? And right now they do. There's no need for that. We talk about caps on damages. That is related to that, but why don't we start by capping attorneys' fees when they have these enormous verdicts? Who pays for that? Everybody in society. It's not the insurance company, because we just pass that along. That's how the system works. We shouldn't have all the people in our state paying for this. That's why you've seen the cost of auto insurance, the cost of homeowners insurance increase. Because as Cassandra and Travis both said, we have one of the most aggressive litigation systems in the United States. It's no longer about compensating a victim. When you have third-party litigation funding, that is frequently funded by overseas people who are making a financial investment in these litigation claims. It's not, and not only that, you frequently will see that the people who are suing, the plaintiff itself, are getting a de minimis amount of the recovery. Most of it is actually going to these third-party funding agencies and the trial lawyers. That's not the way our legal system was designed. You've had bills that have passed the state legislature just this past year, which have unlimited attorney's fees in them for somebody who's suing, and only for the plaintiffs, not for the defendants. So even if the case is dismissed, the plaintiff can get unlimited attorney's fees if they win. That is not something we should be supporting in New York State. And the Attorney General has put in 3 of those bills, and 2 of them have passed, and they are really setting a dangerous precedent in New York State. It's called UDAP, okay, Unfair and Deceptive Claim Practices. The Attorney General fails to mention that we've had a deceptive claim practice for New York State since the 1950s in the insurance law. But this expands it dramatically. Hopefully the governor's going to veto that this year. It's a problematic bill. But at the end of the day, if we can turn around and lower overall costs, that will lower it for all of our policyholders, which we want to see. If we can turn around and get transparency on third-party litigation financing, as Travis mentioned, that's very valuable. And if we can do some tort reform, that is going to have a tremendous impact. You just saw the proof is in the pudding with Florida, where they gave their policyholders $1 billion worth of rebates. That's dramatic. I think everybody'd like to see that.
Thank you, Bob. Bill?
Well, thank you, Senator Helming, Senator Ort, and thank you for your service, Lieutenant Governor Duffy, in the past there with that. I wanted to focus ARP's comments today on energy affordability. We hear from our membership across the state through surveys, through teletown halls, through conversations that their utility bills are too high, they're unaffordable, and they're having trouble paying for them now, and they're worried about paying for them in the future. So when ARP hears that, and we know many of our members live on a fixed income, many in rural areas in this part of the state, and they rely on Social Security as their main source of income, that is very troubling to ARP. And something needs to be done in the state of New York about that. We've been looking at the monthly data that utilities send to PSC. So there's an ongoing case in New York State that every utility who operates in New York has to send monthly data to the PSC about how many people are behind on their bill, how many terminations they had, how many people received a final notice of termination. So looking at that data, we looked at the last month available in New York, which is October. And in New York, 1.2 million households are 60 days behind on their utility bill, owing close to $1.86 billion. So that's the state of New York. And the average amount owed by these households is about $1,400. So in ARP's opinion, just at a state level, that's a major issue in and of itself. If you look at the terminations of the state just in the month of October, there was 1,200 households every day in the state of New York who were terminated from their service, which is close to, there was 39,000 terminations in New York for lack of payment, just in the month of October. If you get to the area here, I believe most of this area is NYSEG and RG&E, I think a little grid. But if you look at NYSEG and RG&E, over 176,000 households were 60 days behind on their bills, owing close to $167 million in the NYSEG RG&E area. The average amount owed in this area that they were 60 days behind on is about $1,000 that they already owe, and they're constantly getting termination notices from the utility. You have to pay, you have to pay. So that's a problem in and of itself. In this area, over 4,000 households were terminated from service in October for the lack of payment for NYSEG and RG&E's area. So that's another problem. If you look at the summer of June, July, and August of this year, NYSEG and RG&E terminated over 21,000 households in the area for lack of payment. So when you invited us to talk about affordability, we look at those numbers, and that's what goes off in our head, is that we have an affordability problem on a residential side. Obviously, we're not involved in the business side, but on the residential side, we have an energy affordability problem for residents, homeowners, and a good chunk of ARP members do own homes. I mean, we do have we're 50 plus, we have over 2 million members in New York. We have members in every county. A couple members from the local area came here today to hear the discussion, but it's just the homeowners. It's so troubling when people get these high bills. They have major issues. It just causes problems through their whole household, economics. So something needs to be done, and what can be done? I'd like to say that Senator Ort, Senator Helming, you've already actually done something. You voted on a bill last session which creates a consumer utility advocate, which will be solely, the sole purpose of this advocate is to represent the consumer at the PSC rate table. The governor actually the bill was sent to the governor. As we all know from Albany, she has 10 days to either veto or sign it. The bill has been vetoed in the past, so we're not sure what's going to happen to that. But overall, we have an affordability problem, so what can be done? We need to change the way rates are done in this state. We think that the PSC needs some real reform. And you said, Senator, people want a seat at the table. There is a very limited seat at the table for residential ratepayers at the Public Service Commission. It is completely dominated by big industrial users. It is completely dominated by the utility, whose rate case is before the PSC, down to the point where we've called the PSC during rate cases and said, when's the next agenda coming out? And they tell us, well, the utility has to send us the agenda for the meeting, which is, I thought you were the regulator. I thought you were going to set the agenda. I thought you were going to call us to the table. So now you have, just on the inside, the power of these utilities and big industrial users. And I don't want to say all utilities are bad, but it's like ARP's issues with the pharmaceutical industry. We love your product keeps us alive, but you charge too much for your product. It's the same with the utilities. You got to cool your home, you got to heat your home, but you're just charging too much for your product. So there's various issues. I mean, the bill that you supported, you voted on, is one way. We need to get more consumers at the table through an intervenor process to get more residential ratepayers. And Senator Ort, you mentioned HEAP. Whatever the issues are in Washington, whoever's to blame, it's another discussion. But they have to fund this. It is our tax dollars, but it's federal tax dollars. It has to come to the states. The government could shut down in January 30th again, and I think it's going to go back to the New York State Legislature. What are we going to do about this low-income program? Is there going to be money? Does the state, allocate money on a stopgap measure? Would the legislature do that? Would the governor do that? And you mentioned SNAP. I mean, there's major issues with SNAP in the state of New York with affordability. If there's some of these requirements go through, and whether people disagree or agree with them, people will go without food. Money flowing from the federal government won't flow to the retailers. So there's, I really think the legislature has to look at SNAP, how much they can go legally, and not run afoul of the federal government. But I could sit here and complain for the next 15 minutes. I don't want to get in front of your dinner, Senator Ort. But,
I haven't had lunch, but you're
I haven't had lunch either.
yeah,
But.
well, you've been sitting here with me.
So, I mean, that's the numbers are troubling. I mean, all these numbers are on the Public Service website, and it's filed every month.
I appreciate you sharing that data with us. Question for you. So right now, RG&E and NYSEG, they have pending rate increases. Has AARP, have you filed, or did you file?
We oppose
Public
it.
comment? Did
Yes,
you
we
formally
filed,
file?
we sent a letter to the governor, and we have sent a letter to the Public Service Commission.
Good.
And-
And what about, do you encourage your members to submit directly to the PSC?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
We use, not to go into ARP's secrets, but we have certain ways of communicating through, through a system, an email system, a telephone system, and we have really good involvement of our membership to contact the PSC.
And just to comment on the PSC, I've had so many conversations with the individual members about my concerns, what I'm hearing from my constituents. You know, when I have a constituent in my office crying because her electric bill is more than her mortgage, and most of her electric bill is, by the way, the delivery charges that have skyrocketed, I call the PSC, and what I hear over and over again is their priorities are safety, reliability, and then affordability. But if you have concerns about the PSC, I remind you too that the PSC members are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. So if you have concerns, you need to.
Oh, no,
but-
believe me, Senator, we have complained, we have shared our concerns with the governor's office. We have shared our concerns with your counterparts in the Senate.
But I do have to say this. I feel like in some ways, the PSC, the utility companies, they've been set up to fail too, right? Like,
I would say, I would push back on that.
Or for them, to be able to point the finger at them and put the blame on them. When the state has known for years that our infrastructure was struggling, and the state hasn't invested, even now, the billions of dollars that are in the state budget are all geared towards the renewable energy. So taxpayers are paying for all that solar and wind development. Then they're getting these increased utility bills from their service providers. They're paying there too. Like, they're paying over and over again, and for what? And these rate increases that are before the PSC, I'll tell you what, in my area, they're not even going to address our energy infrastructure problems. In the town of Canandaigua, where we have that shortage, where we can't build the 650 homes or the 400 that are coming behind that, if these rate increases are approved, it's not going to address that problem.
So, I mean,
And when we say to the developer, look, if you want energy, it's going to cost you $30 million. That's just for one project. Like, we're sticking all these Band-Aids on, and when we put those high costs onto the developers too, it's like the big puzzle, right? That the pieces aren't fitting together because we're driving up the cost of that attainable housing, workforce housing, et cetera.
Well, that's what, I mean, the PSC tells us that when we look at their filings and there's meetings, that they say that one of the big cost drivers is the infrastructure. That's why we have to charge the ratepayers money for the infrastructure. So you're turning around and basically saying that's not necessarily, that may not be the case in all instances. But I can tell you, I mean, the utilities have to do what they have to do. They have to maintain the pipes and the system, the infrastructure.
Yeah.
They also have to comply with the new environmental law, which, the PSC is driving up, rates by 10% or more. But it's just, from our perspective, just give the ratepayers a shot at the table.
I
We
couldn't agree
can't
more.
cap the cost. We can't say you can't charge this. We can't say you can't have reliable pipes. But at least give us a shot to push back.
Yeah.
The utilities, this is an unknown
But
fact.
how does that work? Like,
Well,
with
the
the
bill that you-
interveners, I've been through it with large-scale utility solar projects, where you're supposed to have access to intervener funds and have a seat at the table. It's a big scam.
See, we don't have an intervenor law for rate cases for residential rates. We don't have a consumer advocate at the table. 40 other states in the country do. We don't. The issue is that in our opinion, the game is it's dominated by the people who are raising the rates. They dominate the process at the PSC. We don't think the residential ratepayer, I know there's different concerns with builders, but I mean, we don't think we get a fair shake at all.
I don't either. I'm not
You know, and
disagreeing.
we're not happy with that.
To your point, I don't disagree, and what we hear from RG&E and NYSEG is that we're going to the PSC with our rate case, and we go with our rate case, then we're gonna build more infrastructure so you can have capacity to do your project. And I'm not looking to put the burden on the ratepayer, but the system is broken. That they just tell
We
us
agree.
that, hey, the PSC has to approve our rate case because we can't put the burden of infrastructure on the ratepayer until the PSC tells us we can.
So here's the thing, they're telling us that all this stuff is we need to maintain the pipes, we need to build for the future, we need to have the grid for the future, and we need to do all this infrastructure. They're charging us, and then they turn around and tell you that we can't do it? So where's the residential ratepayer money going to?
I always wonder, does the PSC look at how profitable like an Avangrid is? That are there excess profits that should be going back into our system, or are they allowed to run their books privately and still make excess profits that don't roll back into infrastructure costs? I don't know how that works, but it
Well,
doesn't
they're
seem
allowed-
that
It's a private entity, right? We do not live in a,
there's no transparency to it.
well, there may not be the level of transparency that is required. It's not again, there are shareholders, right? This is a for-profit, we don't have, this isn't Sweden, we don't have the utilities, while it provides a public utility, they are a for-profit company, right? So I think that's an important dynamic to understand. Some people don't like that, okay? But that is how it goes. I do think it's important to have a consumer advocate, if nothing else, to be there to say, well, wait a second. What are we talking about here? Either to the PSC or to the utility who's providing because I do think there's always a coziness that you get between regulator and regulated. And somewhere it's up to the legislators to say, well, because I can tell you right now, it's tough. We have old infrastructure. We've heard it. When you don't take, it's like when we had a mayor here, we have a mayor here. It's like if you never did a reassessment. And then you don't do it for 60 years. We're not going to reassess the houses. And then one day, you gotta. And guess what? People go, what the hell is this? And what you really is saying, well, we didn't do our job. We didn't do what we were supposed to for 60 years. And now you got to pay it all at once. That's not good either, right? And you get whipsawed as the homeowner, as the taxpayer. You go, well, this is BS. I can't afford to pay this all at once. And I think that's true in infrastructure. We haven't made the investments. The state hasn't. The state hasn't required the utility to. And so guess what? All of a sudden, one day, you go, well, it's got to go up. And so the ratepayer gets a bill. And then you find out, oh, well, it really doesn't even address what we need to. So I just feel like there's not a level of honesty about what really is going on, how much we make, how much it costs to run the line. And then the regulators, I don't think, always do their job. There's obviously political pressure. There's not people at the table. But I'll add one other thing to it. Bill, you brought up the pharmaceutical as a way of, and I get that from AARP's vantage point. I get the comparison. But I'll disagree in this regard. Look, I don't work for National Grid, National Fuel, RG&E. I want them to be able to provide power, but I'm not here to shill for them. So let's just say that they're greedy sons of bitches who want to make money. Let's just say that, okay? We can all agree on that part, just for argument's sake. I imagine they're the same greedy sons of bitches in Pennsylvania, right? In Pennsylvania, it's about 40% lower energy costs. 40%. Same greedy son of a bitch company. Utility. Why is it so much cheaper? I'll tell you why. Because they have access to energy sources that we do not in New York. And they don't have a CLCPA. And they have much more available natural gas. So when we talk about affordability, we got to just be honest about, there are some communities, for instance, I'll use this example, in Westchester, Scarsdale. They want the garbage men to pull the garbage, not only empty it, but I want it brought back up and put next to my house. And you know what? I'll pay extra for that because I have the money to do it if I live in Scarsdale. So if we want that in New York, if we want to pay more, I guess that's an option for us, and we are. But if we want to pay less, then we got to be real about how we get there. And so one of the things I think it's an easy target, and I'm not saying they're not without blame, because they are, but it would be unfortunate, I think, in the affordability discussion if we only stop with, we're going to limit what National Fuel can charge. We're just going to limit it. Okay, you can do that, but you're not solving the root cause. You're only solving the symptom. The symptom is the cost. The root cause of why the cost is what it is. I know it's harder, and it takes time, and it's not as fun, and it's not sexy, but we have to do it. That's our job, and I think everyone here, it's our job to understand the root cause of why things in New York State are more expensive than other states. If we're not willing to do that, and we just want to say, I'm going to cap what you can spend, I'm going to cap what you can charge, then we're not going to actually fix the real issue, which is providing reliable energy, electricity, heat to people at an affordable rate. We're not being honest with people about why it is the way it is. Because if we were, then we would bring up the Pennsylvania fact that it's up to 40% less. And for people who live in the southern tier of New York, that's an easy thing. I'm just going to move 10 minutes over here, and I can get the same crappy winter, still maybe catch the Bills game, and pay less for my heat. Or for senior citizens who are on fixed incomes, for somebody's grandma who's 78 years old on a fixed income, on a fixed pension, and she's not going to move to Florida at that point. She's here. Her grandkids are here, hopefully. She's here. She can't pick up and move. We talk a lot about the mobility. I know I mentioned that. But there's a lot of people in New York who can't move, either because of health, either because of whatever it might be. They deserve someone at the table for them too. So I agree we need someone at the table all day long. But I think we got to be really honest about how we are at where we are in this state, and that it's a deeper discussion than just saying it's the utility, it's the PSC. They have plenty of blame to go around. They need to be have their knuckles wrapped as well. But we are doing things in New York, policy-wise, that is making things in New York more expensive. And I think we have to be honest about that and try to address that.
I'll just add real quick to that, too. In New York State, the utility companies, and I'll use RG&E, NYSEG as an example, on their delivery fees, 35% of that is to cover the CLCPA mandates. So it's New York's taxes and fees. So when we're looking at what do we need to do to reduce the cost for ratepayers, because I agree, they cannot shoulder another penny of cost increases. Again, I think a lot of it goes back to the unfunded, the unrealistic, the unattainable mandates that are placed on all of these companies.
Senator, I just had this data point. This is why good staff is invaluable. 30% of utility bills in New York State, 30%, whatever you pay, 30% of that is taxes and government fees, government overhead.
Isn't that what I just said?
So
Yeah.
it's just if we're not driving those down or trying to, then we're not doing our job. I can't do a lot about other forces, the global force, right? We talked about earlier about things we can't control, but we can control that.
I think you had another
Just
point you want to make.
The one point, that when utilities do come to the table, and I don't want to, have you think, we're demonizing utilities, but, they're part of the problem, and hopefully we can work with them for a solution. But one practice that happens, and it would be good for the legislature to look at, is when utilities come to the table, they're economists, they're lawyers, they're expert witnesses that they literally bring in from across the country to push their agenda, push their rate increase, is paid for by us, by the ratepayer. All that cost is rolled in, and they recover all that cost within the rate case. We looked at it a couple of years ago. The number was as high as $20 million from various utility companies rolling that cost in when they came to Albany and looked to increase the rates. So it's kind of, rates are going up, it's unaffordable, and then you see that they cover all their costs of their rate case, and we pay for it. It's just salt in the wound, so to speak. And that's a practice that really needs to be looked at as well. So
Thank you.
I'll just end on that positive note, Senator.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a great topic. I want to kind of separate this and kind of elevate the affordability issue about just the CLCPA. Because I look around the room, and again, I can't speak to residential, but the two greatest costs that I believe that, whether it be food distributors, whether it be insurance companies as a result of the people who do the repairs on your behalf, it's you have utilities and you have labor. Labor being the greatest cost, utilities being the second greatest cost. And unfortunately, and I admit this, I worked on the CLCPA when I was in state government. Nobody listened to our recommendations at the time, but that's, I'm used to that. I'm married. No, sorry. What I would say is that I can assure you the answer is no. What I can also assure you is that upstate, and people say this all the time, is two dynamic entities. Upstate, now I have a different definition of upstate because I'm a downstater, so anything north of the Bronx is upstate. No, but in all seriousness, you ever see the movie The Jerk with Steve Martin? And he gets really excited when the phone book comes out, his name is in the phone book. I am like that when NISO puts out its reports. And for those of you who are not familiar with NISO, they are kind of the entity that manages the grid. And their reports have been alluding to these issues for decades. But what they also note is that upstate is primarily, and the number's over 90%, renewable. Downstate is primarily, fossil fuel. And so we set up a law that dictates a statewide solution, which is electrification, which is driving our affordability issues right now. And I think that we do need to, when we talk about solutions, there's a lot of talk in the Senate about how they're not going to revisit the CLCPA, but I do think you need to look at how energy is created and disseminated to whether it be homeowners or businesses, because as you mentioned, we're charging people upstate an inordinate amount for delivery charges for a primarily downstate solution. And I don't want to get into necessarily the upstate downstate issue, but it goes into the whole issue of what is driving our costs as business entities. I can tell you production relies on electrification. And you need that diversification because I can't see a scenario where you're going to electrify the Adirondack Park. It's just never going to happen. So, but I do think we need to look at this strategically and figure out how we can, reward upstate for its reliance on renewable energy and figure out path forward for how we convert downstate in terms of their reliance on fossil fuels, and in some cases during peak periods, even coal, because we still use peaker plants. Until we have that conversation, how we get there, whether it's utility companies, whether it's, the ratepayers, we haven't dissected what problem are we really trying to solve. Because in my mind, and I apologize for ranting here, but New York is the gnat on the tail what's wagging the dog. We're 0.4% of the world's climate problem. That is a fact. That's not a made-up number. And yet what we're trying to do is, I believe in leadership on climate issues. I'm not opposed to, I believe in climate change. I think what we've done is we've forgotten what the problem we're trying to solve is, and people who maybe are smarter than I have determined what the outcome and solutions are. We need to revisit how we achieve that goal. And I think, that might be a separate meeting, if you will, and we've got lots of ideas in our industry of how we do this, but how do we deal with that? Because that is driving everything, including municipal taxes, because the same fees that we're paying in terms of utilities, the same, pricing that's being approved is impacting the municipalities, whether it's your DPWs or whether it's your recreation facilities. And with the property tax cap, that's hard in some cases to pass along, which means that you're cutting other essential services. And we really need to have this holistic conversation. And with that, I'll just shut up.
No, that was a great summary.
That is good.
Did you have something you wanted to add?
Short on time, but I just want to say that one theme that comes out today is that policies are being enacted in legislation really without the people that should be at the table. And really, any good leader should bring all sides, listen, and then hopefully make a thoughtful decision going forward. But so much comes out that really does not take that into consideration. I think the climate issue, I might want to lose 20 pounds, but I can't do it in a day or a week. Maybe it's 5 years. But the timelines, the restrictions here, and I think also the demonization of business in some areas here. I mean, business drives the state, but as you drive them out, they leave, which they do. They're very portable. And I go back to my time in office. They're Tennessee, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, in our backyards every day, trying to get a business to leave. And when they leave, jobs leave with that. But a more thoughtful approach to these policies and these I think one thing maybe we should look at, because everybody here lobbies to a certain degree, how do we become more clear with the communication to get facts out? Because the regulatory climate, if you look at it, actually is what's driving the costs up. And I think, Leader, you said it rolls downhill. I mean, they're not a business, grocery store, they're not going to absorb that. They're going to take it in, and it goes down to the consumer, and it hits everybody. So really, that whole blueprint across the board, there's so many opportunities for change that I think it'd be bipartisan, come together. But we're being governed by the end zone sometimes and driven. I think that the advocates, which I would have to think, the most passionate ones are driving us off the cliff. I probably represent this many, but we're all paying for the same thing. And I just think that everybody here made great comments. And just maybe a more thoughtful approach. And I'm not sure if it's possible in today's environment, either in D.C. or in Albany, I don't know. But the way out is really to sit and listen and proceed, because if affordability is a buzzword, you can't just keep saying it and tax somebody. Yeah. You have to fix it. And I think you have to drill down and fix it. And I just will close by saying this. I mentioned the leader earlier. I was in New York City last week, and a person in the state government said, people agree with the timelines with this, just backing off, with Cap and Invest and CLCPA, not the emission, but just maybe get those timelines off and just pump the brakes. But everybody was afraid to put their head above and say that, because in election year, they're afraid, I don't care what side, you draw attention to yourself. I just think we need some kind of, hopefully, bipartisan common sense going forward, even picking 3 to 5 things that can make a difference in 2026, because I think there's going to be huge uncertainties. And Mr. Barbado, I love what he said. This whole housing market, it's not because we're the hottest place on earth, but there is no building going on. Construction is stopping. We're hearing developers say, I'm not going to build a house. Yeah. I'm not going to build an apartment project. It's too expensive. I'm not going to electrify it. And we look at the actual cost that people are going to pay. And one building downtown, $250,000 to electrify an existing building. And is the owner going to absorb that? No. It'll be everybody's rents. So maybe your guidance, how we can do this, I think we have to lobby more effectively, have a stronger message out there, and have data. I think data, stories, and examples across the board help people understand, because otherwise they're looking at social media headlines. Nobody gets a paper any longer. They just look at what the headline story, but I think we miss the facts. And when you drill down, I think you find out there's some opportunities for some real change. And I very much appreciate you hosting this today, because I think it is of value. I have a whole page of notes from comments from Roundtable.
Travis?
If I could just, because it was mentioned by several panelists, and I didn't want to just gloss over it. Several of us mentioned New York Labor Law 240-241 scaffold law. We're talking about construction, affordable housing, taxes, for school taxes, property taxes. Some may suggest that it's a fool's errand to pursue reforms to New York scaffold law, which requires absolute liability for elevation-related falls. I think we're sticking our head in the sand by not continuing to talk about that and push and press on that particular issue and seek reforms, because I was just with one of my members yesterday who said I can have an electrical contractor in my office, and carriers are falling over themselves to want to insure that business. But then when we need to cover that labor law exposure, it's a ghost town, and it's very expensive. Businesses, small contractors can't expand, they can't grow their business, because even when they have business opportunities to take on projects, they can't find the coverage. And if they do find the coverage, it's exorbitantly expensive. So my members look at this from the marketplace perspective. And there is a very, very limited market for this important coverage. We're paying for it through increased school taxes, property taxes, as that all trickles downhill as we're paying for these premiums. And so affordable housing in particular, significant concerns there as we're trying to build more homes in New York, tack on that, and whatever the number is, I've heard 15%, 30%, whatever it is, it's a lot of money. And it's going to these claims where there's very little opportunity to actually provide a defense. Take that idea and place it in any other sort of put that in the criminal justice context where you're limiting someone's ability to defend themselves against a claim. There would be outrage, riots in the street. But here we have it happening in the insurance space, and we're told, well, we're not going to touch that. And so that trickles down to the cup of coffee that you mentioned. What percentage of that cup of coffee is insurance, and particularly the scaffold law? Even though you wouldn't naturally make the connection, somewhere along the way, it touched it, I'm certain.
Thank you.
Can I expand on that just slightly too? Because I appreciate what Travis was just saying about carriers and the ability to be able to write the coverage. You know, when he talks about there not being a lot of options, it's because, and I think I heard this from different panelists in different ways, but to be able to do business in the state, you need certainty, right? In our business, we're assessing and then managing that risk. If you have something that is similar to or is a blank check, that's really hard to be able to assess and manage that risk. That's what we're talking about litigation. Scaffold law certainly being one of the primary examples of it's very hard to determine what that really is going to look like. And obviously, if we're talking about affordability, we want to bring those costs down. But part of the challenge is, I think there are challenges in New York that it's hard to have that level of certainty in whatever business you're in. And I think what Travis was just alluding to, that's why carriers have such a hard time being able to determine what that risk is and be able to manage it appropriately.
Thank you. Kim?
I was just going to add, there is a group, and Ron, you've probably seen, Built More New York, but there is a group trying to get, I guess it's in House Bill 3548. I'm looking at an email. They're trying to do some scaffold reform for New York in that House bill, and in DC and federally, in case everybody wasn't aware. I don't know if you were aware of that. And then one thing I was going to add on to something Bob said. You talk about the building's not electrified, we're not building, but then that impacts both Jim's members at the home builders, my members at the Builders Exchange. Then we're not building. They lay off employees. Yeah. Everything becomes affordable. Then you get into the mental health crisis, and you've just recreated this big waterfall effect of things we're not talking about, right? So.
I just want to comment, I'm sorry,
No.
because I think it's important for those who hear in the media. There have been a number of studies done, New York being the only state that has this particular law right now. There is no impact on safety provided by this law. So, I don't want to leave us with the impression that, our workers are our most valued commodity. There is absolutely no indication that the scaffolding law provides any safety benefit. Matter of fact, what it does is introduces fraud, and that's what it's focused on. I just needed to make that point.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank everyone for your time, and Leader, give you the opportunity if you wanted to kind of wrap up.
Well, I want to thank you for doing this, because we are in Senator Helming's district, and again, these roundtables, they don't happen unless there's members who are willing to put them together, and unless folks like yourself are willing to come out and talk about these things, right? Because that is important, and that's why we want this back and forth. Bob talked about what we need is some common sense, but I think I would add, because I don't think common sense is very common unfortunately. If it was, then maybe we wouldn't be here. I think what we need, because you talked about, it's an election, we just need political courage. Yeah, it's tough, and somebody will be sad or upset if you take a different position. But oh well, if we're trying to make things more affordable for people, that's what we should be doing. So yeah, maybe some people on the environmental side will be a little bit upset because we paused the timelines. But guess what? Whenever we bring up, and Senator Hellman can verify this, whenever we ask the question, what is the cost of this? Because I'm okay if you think something's the best thing to do, as long as you can say this is the cost of it. You should be able to say that. As an elected official, you should be able to tell people what the cost of this benefit is. They always say, we can't afford not to do it. That's a non-answer. I'll be nice. That's a non-answer. I think it's something else too, but it's a non-answer. You're not being honest. Saying we can't afford not to do it doesn't tell me anything. We're 0.4% of the global emissions in the state of New York. We are not going to save the planet from blowing up by New York alone. I'm sorry to break it to everybody. If we're already on that trajectory, it's going to happen. What we are doing is going to chase business out of here to states that have lower environmental regulations, which is called carbon leakage. So those states will continue to be environmentally unfriendly because the businesses and people will go there, and we can have all the climate regulations we want, and it's not going to make a damn bit of difference. So we have to be realistic about what is driving up costs, have the courage and the honesty with constituents, and we have to tell the story. Because politics, regardless of what side you're on, people who win elections, I always tell people, it's who tells the better story. That's what it is. Whoever tells the better story that connects with the folks who are listening, that's who wins. It's like in being in court, right? Sometimes what side tells the more compelling side, that's who gets the verdict they want. And we have to be willing to, and able to tell the story in a condensed way and provide a path, a blueprint, about how we're going to make your life more affordable and be honest with people, because people know. I think voters are actually a lot smarter. They may not know all the, be able to stand up there and have a PhD level conversation. Even I can't. But they know. They know when elected officials are being honest with them, and they know when we're not. They know when we're telling them what they want to hear, and they know when we're giving it to them straight. And we have to be honest with New Yorkers, and we have to offer a blueprint of how we drive down cost and make it affordable for them, make it affordable for employers, make it affordable for their families to stay here. And I think if we can do that, and we're only going to do that by having conversations like this, even when we're not always exactly on the same page, but we're trying to do the same thing. And so I want to applaud all of you for being here, for being honest. Again, I know you all took time out of your busy day to have these conversations with us. And I want to thank Senator Hellman for inviting me and for putting this together and for the great work that she does for the people of the 54th.
Thank you all. Thank you. All right, we have pages and pages of notes that we will be, like the leader said, I believe we have one more roundtable left
Yep.
in Long Island.
Yep.
And then we will reconvene and,
And our conference will have a blueprint
yeah.
from these roundtables. There'll be a thematic blueprint that we will put out early next year. But thank you all for
Thank
being
you.
here. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.